This is a Frank podcast.
Party. Science. Party. Science. Party. Science, everybody, let's hit it. Welcome to the Party Science Podcast, the podcast all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Whee!
I am Courtney Dawson. I am not a scientist. I am a comedian, and I should be recording this podcast, but I'm always just looking at myself in that monitor to see if I am snatched.
Snatched.
Snatched. You know the term snatched?
No.
Snatched little waist. Big boobies, little tiny waist, big booty. Yeah, we're good.
We're good.
Go for it.
This is good.
Okay, now what's your name?
My name is Dr. Joel Rindelab. I am a real-life scientist that gets paid to learn things.
That's a pretty sweet job.
It's not bad. Yeah.
And what are we talking about today, Joel?
Today, we have a very special topic and a very special guest that's going to be joining us later, Dr. Suresh from the University of Auckland, who actually looks at psychedelic drugs and sees how they impact people and potentially any treatments that they may have.
This is a topic that's very close to both of our hearts, and I'm sure anyone who listens to a podcast about drug, sex, and rock and roll, they will also be very into it. I loved this conversation. I loved being able to ask, serious questions, because it is something that I am genuinely interested in, not just the fun part of taking drugs, but also what it means and what it could potentially mean for people's health.
It is a really interesting topic, and it's something that we don't actually know a lot about because things like LSD, psilocybin, which is the magic mushroom compound, are restricted. They're in the U.S. called Schedule I drugs, meaning according to the U.S. government, they don't serve any medical purpose and they are harmful.
And they've been absolutely demonized by our evil governments, trying to. Oh, look, that's another podcast.
That's another podcast. But you may be referring to the 1970s, where people like Richard Nixon in the U.S. led the war on drugs.
That is certainly what I speak of, and I'm also talking about MK Ultra. And if you don't know what that is, have a Google, babe, because your mind's about to be blown.
That is beyond the depth of this podcast, but there is some drug overlap in that.
And there are many podcasts that will go into very deep detail, which I do suggest that you check out.
Yes, yeah, we're going to stick to actual proper clinical trials for these substances. So basically, the reason why, or one of the reasons why, scientists haven't been able to, use these drugs for treatments is because access is so restricted, right? So if you wanted to do a study looking at acetaminophen or like Tylenol on how that impacts people, super easy to get. If you wanted to see how LSD might treat a certain condition, there's going to be slightly more paperwork involved.
It sounds like, from what we talked about with Suresh, that there was quite a bit of paperwork involved, which actually, to be fair, I am actually happy about. I think that, I wish there was, I'm glad that there is a lot of sort of hoops to jump through because, it is a controlled substance and we do want to be looking after people who are in these drug trials because, as we've seen with some papers, the people are not looked after sometimes. But luckily we have incredible researchers here and some incredible educational institutions that are doing all of that good mahi. And on top of that, Suresh is just like a really cool guy. He is from Hamilton. He's not in Hamilton anymore, but that is one of my favorite places in the country.
Whoa.
Look, I know that you lived in Hamilton and I didn't, but when I go there, I love it. What's that? There's a restaurant there called Dr. Pickles or something, and it is the bomb. Anyway, this is
Pickles.
Mr. Pickles.
He doesn't quite have the PhD.
He's working on it. He's studying. So yeah, I was really Suresh is a great guy and sounds like he's doing some awesome mahi. So let's roll the tape. Is that what you say now? So I'm constantly just trying to cut everything off and like, okay, play the sting.
Well, we need to talk about LSD. What is it?
Oh, yes.
What is LSD to you?
LSD to me is something that because I have tried LSD before. I didn't do LSD until I was quite older because I had the fear of God put into me in my childhood about all of the, like evil, bad things that are going to happen to you. You're going to lose your mind. You're going to take it once and then think that you're a rabbit for the rest of your life, stuff like this. So I didn't try it until I was quite older. I knew that it was a psychedelic, and I tried it for the first time probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I haven't really had a bad experience with it. When I have taken it, I've been as careful as one can be buying illicit street drugs and haven't had a bad time on it yet. But yeah, I guess the effects that I've experienced are like a lot of laughing, a lot of euphoria, some great conversations, sometimes with other people, sometimes with trees. And yeah, I've always had really positive experiences with LSD. So there is a video of me in my phone of me with no top on sitting on a driveway of an Airbnb just laughing, and I look like a golem. So that might look scary to some people, but I was in fact having an incredible time.
So LSD leads to half-naked golem sesh.
Exactly. Fun. Yes, very fun! Exclamation mark. But what actually is it? Because it's not like psilocybin, which is like naturally occurring. Right. What's the buzz of it? How did it come about?
To me, LSD is lysergic acid diethylamide.
Of course, yeah.
So this drug was originally discovered in the early 20th century by a dude called Albert Hofmann.
Great guy.
And so he was actually working for a pharmaceutical company, and they were actually looking to make new types of drugs. That was the whole idea. And so what he was doing is working on some products of this fungus that would infect wheat, mess people up, cause all sorts of bad things. But fungi are funky. Like we actually develop a lot of drugs from them, like antibiotics that come from fungi usually. Mm-hmm. So what he did is he was doing some old chemistry nerd work in the lab, created this compound, tested it out for what he wanted, didn't work, so it's kind of boring. He sat on it for a while. Then, in the back of his mind, he's like, you know what? This LSD 25, I think there's something there. So he got back in the lab, started playing with it, and then he must have like spilt something or on his hand or something because he just starts tripping balls.
That would be really scary. I can imagine if you are not expecting to have an LSD reaction and then you have one. Holy damn! But he lived.
Oh yeah, he lived just fine. He was the first person in the world to experience LSD.
And then he was immediately like, we need to dip this in some paper and cut some perforated holes in it and deal it on the streets.
So funnily enough, 3 days later, that's exactly what he did.
My brother.
Scientifically, though, so he measured out a dose of 250 micrograms. So like which would be a small dose of any other drug. Mm-hmm. That just to show how sensitive humans are to LSD. So 1 microgram is 1 million times smaller than a gram.
Cool. Okay, yeah. I've done the maths. Yeah. Checks out. Yeah.
So he has 250 micrograms, and he thought it'd be like, a safe, small amount. And then all of a sudden, he's like, oh, boy.
So he did this on self-testing, just on himself.
He self-tested,
okay,
which you don't do
in
the chemistry lab. You don't just start taking random chemicals.
But this is back in the day.
This is back in the day. And this was after he had that enlightening experience.
Can I ask a question? Do you believe that it was an accident? That he said, oopsie, just dropped a little bit on my hand, even though I'm a scientist and I should really know better?
Well, this is before gloves, so I think.
True. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He wasn't even wearing safety goggles, I assume. So maybe he was just doing some eye drops or something. I don't know.
This is the wild science west. Okay.
Yeah. So he's a scientist. So he documented it, 250 micrograms. He apparently this is all rumors. I can't confirm it, but took it at the time of 4:20 p.m. towards the end of the day.
Interesting. I prefer to take it in the morning. But, yeah.
And then his last journal entry at 5 p.m. was beginning dizziness, feeling of anxiety, visual distortions, symptoms of paralysis, desire to laugh. That was his last entry.
Of course it was. If you ever try to write on acid, it's not going to happen.
So
I laugh.
So what he does is he's like, I need to go home, right? So he gets on a bike
Yep.
and goes down just like a tunnel. It goes on a time machine and makes it back home. And so that was on April 19th, 1943. And that day is now known as Bicycle Day.
Oh my God. Fuck yeah. I love this guy. Can you imagine? First of all, operating a bicycle on that much LSD and then going through a tunnel. That's crazy. And but again, he lived.
He did live. So that's one of the things with LSD. I know we're talking about it. Of course, we don't condone or promote the use of drugs on this show. But we do try to give you as much science as we can behind them.
Yes, just like Albert.
Just like Albert. The first true tech bro.
He's like, oh my God, this tunnel looks incredible. And I am now performing at peak optimum. It's like, no, Albert, you can't write. You can barely move. You have paralysis now. Okay. Well, I love that guy. And now it's kind of common.
It's common, yeah. So his 250 micrograms would be maybe considered like a double dose.
Yes.
Yeah, like 2 tabs or something, roughly in translation to today.
Well, actually, in solidarity with Albert, I will say that the first time that I took LSD was accidentally a double dose.
Oh.
Because we bought, and again, I'm not promoting, yada, yada. We bought, there was 5 of us, and we bought 5 tabs, and the person who we bought it off was a good friend. He knew that it was our first time, and he knew that we were at a festival for multiple days, so he said, as a favor to us, he gave us 10 tabs, which is, of course, 2 rows of perforated things. But we, who had never taken LSD before, were like, oh, this must be, he's cut them into halves for us.
Oh, I'll just do a half dose then.
So we did half and then was like, wow, this feels amazing. Should we take another one? Should we take the other half? And what proceeded was, then at the same time, huge extreme downpour. We get back to the tent. I had to take my friend back down because she thought that all of the DJs were demons and that the music was mind controlling everyone and she could seize people's spirits. I was, thank God, pretty solid in the brain. So I was like, I was seeing stuff, but I always knew I'm tripping kind of thing. We get back to the tent. The tent is completely flooded. We find one patch of area that is not wet. We lie down, wrap ourselves in all our clothes, and she proceeds to do Kundalini yoga chanting to ward off the demons from the tent. I cannot imagine what it would be like walking past that tent with 2 completely out of it chickies, one who was having a huge mental breakdown. So that just goes to show that we don't promote drugs, but if you so choose, dosage is very important.
Dosage is
the name of the game because everything is a poison in the wrong dosage. Okay, so just keep that in mind.
Right. Absolutely correct. And that's actually a good point. So with like some of the work that Suresh is going to talk to us about is all about the dosage form, because not trying to get these crazy, wild, trippy experiences, but just something right around or below the threshold where you can even detect it and see how it can basically impact your life.
Exactly. Okay, well.
So talking about LSD dosage, and like just how much it takes to impact you and what are the potential effects. So I want to show you this graph, if we look at it, that shows on the x-axis, so at the bottom, it's just the ratio between an active dose to a lethal dose. So the lower the number, the less likely it's going to kill you from just taking it, from an acute type of impact. Whereas the ones that are higher up on the graph represent, further to the right, represent the drugs that are more dangerous, that you're more likely to die from just from taking it.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the x-axis, and then the y-axis is dependence. And so dependence is something, maybe a little bit hard to quantify, but just the likelihood that you would become addicted or dependent on that drug.
I see. Yeah, heroin is really up there, isn't it?
So in the upper right, we see heroin has a high potential to kill you from taking it and a high potential to get addicted to it.
I see.
So that would be considered like a dangerous drug just from acute use. Whereas on the other side, we have our psychedelics, our LSD and our psilocybin. So these have low potential for dependence, meaning that we don't believe you're going to be addicted to them. And the amount that it takes to kill you is almost impossible to achieve.
I wonder why there is low dependence. That's a good study if anyone wants to do it. Why is dependence in psychedelics seem to be lower?
One of the, I guess, contributing factors, maybe, of course, like this is a good research study, is that just such a small amount is needed. Remember, we're talking on the micrograms, whereas if you're doing alcohol, right, you're drinking milliliters of it, right?
That's a lifestyle.
Yes.
Yeah.
So dosage could be a part, but also I think what you're getting at is how it impacts the brain as well, which is current area of research.
Yes, yes, very cool. So I mean, and I can see why it is possible to do research on LSD and not heroin, because that really does seem pretty dangerous to try and study. And
well, fun fact, heroin is not a Schedule I substance. It has less restriction because it has medical use.
It does. My nan was a nurse and she said that they used to just carry it around on their little tray. There was no sort of real regulatory things put in place to stop people from just snatching one. She was like, you used to use heroin.
Yeah, you basically just take codeine and change it a little bit and it's heroin. It's like a more potent codeine.
I see. Well, that doesn't seem to be causing any problems at all.
But yeah, that gets into to the point of having an actual doctor with a prescribed dosage and treatment plan rather than something that's completely unregulated, which could be much more harmful if not done under the supervision of a professional.
Right.
Awesome. All right, so we got that under the way. Let's actually talk to a professional with the one, the only Dr. Suresh.
Expert interview. Expert interview. Expert interview. Expert interview.
All right, welcome back to the Party Science Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, professor at the University of Auckland, Suresh Muthukumaraswamy. You're going to correct me on that pronunciation, right?
It's totally off, but I'm not going to correct you.
You want to give it a crack?
I've already forgotten.
Muthukumaraswamy?
Lovely
Suresh, how'd you feel about that intro?
The intro song?
As an academic, when you get called an expert, you always feel a little bit uncomfortable, like with the old imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
so, of course.
Yeah, So,
I mean, but if you're not an expert, who is?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
So, what are we talking about today, Joel?
Well, so Suresh does some really groundbreaking and fantastic research on the field of applications of psychedelic drugs, particularly working on a study on LSD microdosing. So, I mean, Suresh, how did you get into LSD?
You mean as a research
topic?
As a
research topic.
Yeah, research topic.
No.
Yeah, we're not talking like at a psytrance rave or something.
Yeah, no. I started doing LSD research in 2014 when I was working in the UK. But previous to that, I'd done research on magic mushrooms, psilocybin. So that was actually my kind of first scientific start with psychedelic research. And I was already doing psychopharmacology research. So then magic mushrooms, and we did some studies with psilocybin, and it was like, well, what next? Let's do LSD. So they do pretty similar things to people in the brain. So
it's a gateway drug then.
Yeah, psilocybin. They're all gateway drugs to
To more research.
to more research. Yeah, and so LSD. So we've just picked that up really. So I moved back to New Zealand in 2014 after doing 3 or 4 years of psychedelic research in the UK, and have sort of picked it up after a little bit of a hiatus here while I got my research group established, and now we're full train on doing LSD research.
Amazing. So yeah, tell us about this research. What are you looking into?
Yeah, so I guess the background is in 2010, this guy Jim Fadiman published this book on called the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, and he introduced this kind of new concept that really hadn't been talked about much, was this idea of taking microdoses of LSD. So as opposed to taking like a big full trip, people would cut the tabs up into 10 little pieces and take a microdose every couple of days, and they claim that was improving their mood, helping them out, do various things. So this is very different to what people were doing in the 60s, right? Taking big tabs, going to Woodstock and et cetera, et cetera. And so we became interested in that phenomenon because no one had ever really studied it much before. And so that's, as a scientist, you're kind of looking for new things to study. And there were these claims about how it's improving mood and cognition and making feel people better. So we thought, well, what's the scientific basis for that? And that's kind of how we got into it.
Amazing. That's really interesting because you do hear a lot about microdosing on sort of like I don't know how to define it, but I guess like spiritual bro podcasts. I go to the gym.
Tech bros.
Yes, exactly.
Microdose, gym, code.
Yeah. And I'm like, turning my body into a machine to be like optimal health or whatever. So that is really awesome to know if it's actually true. So what have you found so far? So is this like ongoing research?
Yeah, it's ongoing research. Yeah, so we've completed and we've published one trial. We've got a second trial completed, not yet published, that we're writing up. So the first one was in healthy volunteers. The second one was a pilot trial in depressed patients. And now we're full tilt into running a big randomized controlled trial in depressed patients to tell whether it can fix depression after kind of piloting it. And so there's 3 trials actually, and we've got more planned as well.
And how do you sign up for such a trial?
Well, if you're interested, if you're interested, you can sign up. We've got a trial in women volunteers only that will start later this year.
Wow. As someone who's been doing my own self-trials for many years, I would be very interested
Right, you could get paid a pretty penny for it in this case, rather than paying for it.
Mate, this is the best day of my life. I would definitely be looking into
You get paid to do drugs.
Yeah. Well, it's a clinical trial.
Yeah.
So, people give a lot of time. Our patients, volunteers, healthy volunteers, they give a lot of time to our trials, and they get prodded and probed, blood samples taken. In the case of a woman, their menstrual cycles tracked, like all sorts of quite, invasive and giving a lot of personal information, so you have to recompense people for that. And honestly, taking drugs in the labs isn't that exciting. You're surrounded by like white walls and clinical staff poking about it. It's not a huge amount of fun.
It doesn't seem like there's a real downside to it. I would love for someone else to track my menstrual cycle because it really takes me by surprise every month. I'm like, why am I so furious? Oh, okay, there we go.
Well, there are apps for that.
I know there are, but I don't want the government to have my menstrual information. That's another conspiracy theory that we'll get onto another time.
Yeah. Well, you could do it the old-fashioned way and just use a calendar, right?
I could. But yeah, okay, so that's awesome. So the 3 different trials going on at the moment, and I will always skip ahead to the end. I'm like, okay, what have you found so far? What made you interested in get into it in the first place?
Yeah, well, so obviously it hadn't been studied, and one of the reasons we discovered that it hadn't been studied is because LSD is a Class A substance. It was actually very difficult for researchers in other parts of the world to do good trials of this, because what you really want to do in a microdosing study is give people microdoses to take home with them, right? So they can take the microdoses and go to the gym, tech bro up, because that's, you're trying to test people's claims about what they're doing in life, right? That it makes them better at this, that, and the next thing. So it's what you want to test. So you have people have to be able to do that. But actually, the restrictions on controlled drugs in a lot of places of the world mean that you can't let it out of the lab. But in New Zealand, we found in the regulatory fine print that you could.
What?
As part of a clinical research study that if you get all the approvals in place. So we were actually the first place in the world to actually prescribe people to take microdoses of LSD, take them home with them as part of this clinical research study. And I think we're still the only place in the world, apart from maybe Jamaica and kind of places with little regulation, that actually allows that to happen. So we were in a position from a regulatory perspective where we could actually test this properly. So we're the first group in the world to actually do this. And actually test microdosing in a more authentic place. Other places in the world, the participants are stuck in the lab all the time taking the microdoses, and it's not a very good test, right? Because they can't gym bro up in the lab.
Yeah.
But our participants can do that in our studies.
Yeah, because that was my next question. It's how do you get around it in terms of it being illegal and stuff? But obviously...
there's a very controlled and rigorous regulatory pathway working with MedSafe, the ethics committee, medicines control. There's a lot of things to get signed off, and we have very tight control over. Even though we do prescribe it out, we have a lot of procedures in place to make sure that everything's done per protocol.
So how do you give people LSD? Do you just put it on a sugar cube and send them on their way, or what? How does this work?
So we our process is we import the pharmaceutical grade powder. So LSD, when it's produced, is essentially a powder, but that's way too potent to give to people, right? Because LSD is extremely potent. And so then what we do is we work with a subcontracted pharmaceutical manufacturing facility to put it into dose units. And we know exactly. So it's very precise, right? We know exactly within plus or minus 5%. For each dose that we give out, exactly what's in it. So there's no randomness on the street. We know it's pure. We know exactly how stable it is. And then the participants can then take exactly the amount that they're given. And actually, we have the ability to titrate to within 1 microgram with precision about how accurate people are dosing. And so it's very precise.
So you're giving them an actual piece of paper?
No, it's actually, it's a liquid vial.
Oh, a liquid. Okay.
Yeah, yes.
So a solution, and then they just drop it on their tongue?
Under the tongue, hold it under the mouth, sublingual delivery. So they squirt it into the mouth, hold it in the mouth for 30 seconds, job done.
Okay.
Tastes a bit gnarly though, because our formulation has alcohol in it. So it kind of feels like you're drinking a little shot of vodka.
Just taking shots of LSD.
So the participants get given these little vials to take home to microdose. That's awesome. I've never taken LSD in a liquid form before, but my ex-boyfriend did, and he was unwell. But I suspect that is because a scientist had not formulated it. It was probably some God knows who. But that's awesome. So people take it, and then they self-report their how they're feeling?
Depending on which one of the studies it is. Mm-hmm. But essentially, so they'll take it in the morning. Actually, we've got a procedure in place where they actually film themselves taking the doses so that we know exactly what they're taking, when they're taking, that they're not doing anything naughty with what they're supposed to be doing. So we have a procedure in place so that we know that, okay, Tuesday, 9 o'clock, person X took their dose. And then they just get on with their day. They're not allowed to do stuff like drive or whatever for 6 hours after dosing. And then they just go ahead, go to the gym, do the gym bro stuff or whatever they need to do. So they get on with their life. And then at that night and periodically, then they report back to us. There's questionnaires on their phone. We have an mobile phone app that they complete surveys on and stuff to say, felt good, felt this, felt that. Of course, half of them might be on placebo.
Yeah. So that's the question.
Yeah.
So what do you use for a placebo then?
It's a bit tricky. And again, depends on the study. The first study that we did, it was just an inactive placebo. And actually people, some could tell they were on LSD and some not. So it was kind of microdosing's at that threshold of being able to tell. And people have different thresholds, so some could tell and some couldn't. The current trial that we're running, we actually have a slightly more, we have an active placebo where it's either caffeine or Ritalin. And so people will actually have an active stimulant because what we've heard back from participants is the LSD microdose is kind of stimulatory. And so we've got to we're faking that stimulation to see if it's, the microdosing LSD is different than just having a couple of cups of coffee.
So you're trying to control for, I guess, the stimulation aspect of the response rather than changes in like neuroplasticity or
Yeah,
something.
the stimulation aspect, and also that kind of confound of like, oh, I got the active drug, therefore it must do that. And so it's trying to control that placebo effect. So we're getting a bit nerdy here.
Yeah.
But like there's a placebo effect is essentially, people think they've got something and they can detect they've got it. Then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy about what they'll do and behave and feel. So if we try to cast lots of doubt into all that, then hopefully eliminate that placebo response.
That was a question that I had as well. Is like, how did you decide what micro was? Because if it's just a random gym bro with a podcast saying like cut it into 10, how did you determine how much?
Yeah, great question. Based on the literature, people were reporting, about 10 micrograms is in the literature, and that's what we started with in the first study. But what we determined over that first study was that actually people are they have different sensitivities, and for some people, a microdose, like what you're trying to do is hit that threshold, right, of where people kind of just notice it, but it's not like overwhelming. So we're trying to hit a level where people can just notice it, but it doesn't like start leading into trippiness. And so what we've done now is we found that threshold is different people. So now we do what's called titration. Everyone changes their dose. So your microdose might be 8 micrograms and Joel's might be 18 micrograms. And people have the ability over the course of the trial to find their sweet spot because everyone metabolizes the LSD a little bit differently based on the genetics of the liver, and also they're differentially sensitive in their brains to the drug itself.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So it has. That's what I was going to say. Is it depends on people's like if they've done it before, and
potentially we don't. That's like an assumption. We assume that, but we don't actually know it. We haven't formally shown that through data, but that's a reasonable assumption.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So a typical dose of LSD then would be how many micrograms, just for a comparison?
Yeah. So like a trip level microdose is probably like 150 micrograms of like pure LSD base to go tripping.
Yeah.
Around 25 to 50 micrograms, your day gets disrupted. And we like you might not be tripping, but you're like, not functioning properly anymore. And that's not what we're trying to achieve here, because we're trying to achieve people functioning through their day.
Right.
So
it would just be so beautiful to know what's going to disrupt my day, because when I do acid sometimes, and I don't know whether this is true, but I heard that it's in liquid form and they dip the paper, and then if you hold it up, then more of the LSD gets down the bottom, so you never know how strong your trip, if you got a paper from the top or a paper from the bottom, how disrupted your day is going to be.
yeah. I mean, this is part of the silliness of control of drug regulation, right? That look, I can tell you hand on heart that LSD is not a harmful substance, right? That the risk of harm from LSD is actually less than alcohol, right? Like the biggest harms that come with LSD are not physiological, they're behavioral. There's like, you might do some dumb shit when you're tripping, right? You might step out in front of a car or drive a car, God help, Yeah. But the risks are pretty low. But actually, we make things more risky by making it illegal. So then you get this situation where people don't know what they're taking. They don't know what the dose is. They don't know if it's been cut with other things. So actually, the acid that is in my lab is much safer because we know exactly what it is and people can take it with full assurance that it is what it is, and at the dose that it's taken at this particular dose, it will have those particular effects.
Awesome. Can we get into the results now? I want to know what's going on. Can we? Do you have any more questions?
I mean, I have so many questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the most excited I've seen Joel talk to an actual scientist instead of me being like, what is a method? Yeah, so... Go for it. This is your time to shine, boy.
Well, I mean, how difficult is like recruitment for the study? And obviously, you have like a lot of ethics approvals that you have to go through as well. Yeah. So, would you consider that like some of the most difficult parts of the study, or would just getting over the scheduling of the drug itself be more difficult?
Well, the scheduling and the approvals are all wrapped up. I would say that the studies that we do require more regulatory compliance than almost any other study in the country. Almost, God, I can't speak for other parts of the world, but the amount of people that want oversight over what we do is a lot, particularly in the early stages. So we have a lot of paperwork we have to fill out for the ethics committee, MedSafe, medicines control, our funders, the university, our school. Everyone wants to everyone has eyes on us. So we're really careful about what we do, and we're really aware of that. So there's a lot of permissions involved in doing this stuff. It's a bit of a bore, but you've got to do it. Recruitment, for the first study where it was just healthy volunteers, was pretty easy. We got quite a lot of the tech bros.
Yes, of course.
So in the current studies where we're trying to get depressed patients, it's a little more picky with making sure we get people with particular depression, which isn't too severe, but is depression, but also doesn't have too many physical comorbidities. So we're a bit selective there. So we're just kind of we're still recruiting that, and we will be for the next year and a half to fill that trial up. So
what will it be like in terms of the assessment of those people afterwards? Like, will it be interpreted by like a psychologist, or what does that look like
for the clinical patients?
Yes.
Yeah. So we use psychiatric scales. So patient comes in, they get assessed to make sure that they're eligible, and they don't have all those comorbidities, they're physically healthy, etc. But the assessment is basically we run a clinical interview, and we try to grade their depression, and with the scale is called the MADRS scale, and like we're looking for people who have a MADRS of about 30. A research nurse, psychiatrist might do that interview and essentially grade them on a bunch of criteria, and they get a 30. Then they start the trial. They'll be microdosing for like 8 weeks. Maybe they take 16 doses over those 8 weeks. And they come back into the lab and have a similar assessment done. And then we're looking to see how much their depression severity changes. So that's our formal assessment. Then we get all these other kinds of more loose measurements from them as well, like how has their quality of life improved, has their anxiety changed, other things like that, how have they sort of been feeling, just get their thoughts and reflections and try and build that and build a kind of complete picture of their experience and how it's changed their well-being. So we try to keep a pretty open mind. Like we try to quantify it, but we also try to like understand people's experiences as well. And then also try to like measure their biology and measure EEGs from them, take blood samples and measure all this quacky lab stuff. So we try and do the full gamut. Since it's such a big operation, we try to just get as much information as we can.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, would you like to learn about some results?
Results time.
Okay.
What did you find in the trials that you've completed?
Yeah, so the healthy volunteer trial that we've completed, we didn't find any changes in people's cognitive abilities. So this was, say, zero. This is healthy volunteers, right? People who don't have any mood disorder or cognitive deficits, and they were all pretty high functioning as well. From starting to finishing the treatment protocol, that was 6 weeks in that protocol. We didn't find any differences in their ability to like do computations, et cetera, and we didn't find any overall mood changes across those 6 weeks. But what we did see, they were doing a pattern of dosing where they would dose one day, then dose off, dose off, dose on, off. So it was on, off, off. And what we could see was that really clearly on those on days, they would complete surveys every night. And they were reporting increased levels of creativity, connectedness, wellness, and reduced anxiety on the microdosing days relative to the non-microdosing days. So although the microdosing wasn't causing, in this particular population, overall mood increase, on the days of the microdosing, they were feeling pretty good. So they were having, basically, we would say, a really good day when they were microdosing. So.
And were they still completing like a survey or a reflection on the days that they weren't dosing?
Yes. So we were comparing on days to off those days, and then we compared that across the people who were microdosing versus those who were on placebo. So it was quite a complicated statistical model.
Yeah.
That that we use. It's a bit nerdy, but yeah.
So I guess my question is do you foresee the potential of this treatment to be like any other drug where you have to take repeatedly, or is it going to be like one of those where you take it once, boom, oh man, that dose changed my life?
Yeah, so we are, in our current depression trial that we're now looking at it. Okay, if you give it to depressed patients, can you get that mood improvement that people are reporting out in the community? And so then there's a question of what type of treatment would that be? So as opposed to when people go into the lab and take, a big supervised dose of psilocybin or LSD, and that one thing changed my life type thing that made my depression better. This will be more like, well, maybe you take an 8-week microdosing course and see if that improves mood. And we do work with pharmaceutical industry on this. So we are trying to exploring it as a product. What I would say is the way we're doing the microdosing research and the way we're thinking about it is that it's much more of a first or second line treatment for depression. So instead of, say, antidepressants, that maybe you would, in that, as opposed to macrodosing these big things, big doses where maybe people have already failed all the antidepressants. So they're like end of the line. So we're thinking about it more in the early phases of depression. And also we think about it from a health economic point of view. So taking someone to the lab or into a clinical research center but giving them an LSD trip or psilocybin trip, you need to have a nurse there, a psychiatrist, whatever, 8 hours in a clinic, dripping, being psychiatrist, and they need to come in beforehand to be prepared. They need to have psychology done afterwards. Really expensive, right? It's well, we know how much that costs. It's going to be about $15,000 to get that intervention done. That's how much it's starting to happen in Australia. Really expensive. Microdosing, on the other hand, we could probably push that up for like $100, So we're thinking about it in terms of that's a much more viable health economic, if it were to work. If it were to work, maybe it doesn't work, in which case this is all nothing. But if it were to work, it could potentially be a much cheaper intervention that would be much more deployable at scale.
Currently in New Zealand, are those like the clinical big doses of LSD available here, or is it only in Australia?
In Australia, you can get psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression and MDMA for treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are the two things that are kind of approved there that can be done with psychiatry supervision. In New Zealand, one could get it done, and there's no regulatory reason why not, but no psychiatrists are offering it, and no one has tried to ask MedSafe to do it yet.
Right.
But even if you did, like I said, it would be very expensive to deploy. So that's one of the reasons we're thinking about it in this way.
I mean, I hope that it does it does help people, the microdosing. I think because the thing that sort of freaks me out a little bit about the big dose of psilocybin or even MDMA is the way that sometimes medicine and capitalism has to go hand in hand, and that it freaks me out, I guess, the aftercare of having those massive trips. And the cost of that, like, ongoing.
Yeah, it can go wrong as well.
Yes,
it can go really wrong.
So that's why I'm like, I hope the microdosing, because it feels much safer and is also more economic
more acceptable, right? Because not everyone wants to be doing big trips. Like, not everyone wants to be having their minds blown and going to Venus. That's not for everybody. There's a certain demographic that really like it, but it's not for every patient, right? Or every person. So my view is that it's about creating options, and hopefully options that are evidence-based, that work and are safe. One of the things it's a bit boring. You asked me, what are the results? The other result that we have is it's pretty safe.
Yeah.
Like, physiologically, toxicologically, pretty safe. We haven't done enough formal assessment to say entirely that, but we get in there. And the other thing is, we don't see a big withdrawal effect like you get from antidepressants, where you get on them and then you kind of you can't get off them. We don't really see that with microdosing yet. So there are potential advantages there.
What would you like? I know it's like pretty much impossible to say, but what's the like timeline from like if you concluded the studies and you're like, yeah, this could be potentially good. Would you have to do trials in terms of like how it would interact with like other medications and things like that? Like, what would the timeline look like?
Yeah. You said you were going to ask dumb questions.
Look at you getting all sciencey.
Come on.
Only with drugs.
No, it's a great question. So these would be our first phase 2 trials, but maybe in a year we finish it, a year and a half, and then we go, okay, it's working, looking good. We'd have to run more trials in bigger populations. So you're talking a 5 to 10 year time frame, depending on how much money could be raised, how quickly, and then inevitably would have to go overseas to bigger countries with more things. So at that point, though, it becomes essentially like a pharmaceutical company exercise. And as a scientist, I'm not terribly interested in that thing. But so there would need to be more studies, more safety studies, more efficacy studies. And then, looking at things like interactions, although we know for LSD already quite a lot of the interactions. So there would be need to see some things like how it interacts with food, how it interacts with caffeine, coffee, menstrual cycles. So there's all sorts of bits and pieces that you want to know before you go, okay, now this is a product we can push out to people.
Right. Wow, that's heaps of work, man.
Yes, and some of it's really interesting and some of it's less interesting. I'm a scientist, so I enjoy the science part and the project management, not so much.
Yeah, fair enough. And I have a question, like as a scientist, when you do this mahi, do you have like I guess hopes of how it will go in the world? I guess the question I'm trying to ask is it's not like this like sort of dispassionate thing where you're like, I'm just like getting the data and then it goes out into the world and whatever happens after that is none of your business.
No, it's just a dispassionate thing.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah. So my job is to explore reality and uncover the truth of something, and it's not to advocate for or to hope that the results go a certain way. My job is to describe reality and to do that in the most rigorous way that I can. You know, and I don't care if it doesn't work. I care on just executing I want to give it the best chance of working by executing the most careful trial that I can and making sure that everything is done correctly and that we give this product the best chance it has of working. But fundamentally, I'm not invested in the result and I keep that level of dispassionate. And that's important, right? Because if we find that it doesn't work, then people out there who are microdosing with depression, they can all stop and go do something that's actually going to work for them, right? So it's important either way. So it's so I try to be dispassionate about it and just clear-eyed about, just trying to describe reality. Yeah. Even though, of course, it's hard, right? Because you're a person and you have emotions and you see people with problems, but you have to kind of try to build that wall.
Yes, yeah. I was thinking that would be something that I would find really challenging, and not necessarily in terms of like this study, but like I was thinking in terms of I'm getting on my conspiracy buzz again, but like in terms of the development of AI and like inventing all of these technologies that have this huge impact but can be used in such harmful ways. That would be really difficult for me to draw the line, and just be like, okay, like, hey, I made this thing, like, whatever happens to it after here is you guys take care of that.
Yeah, I mean, there is that potential, right? This thing could get taken up by some company and they do some nasty thing, and like, what can you do? Yeah,
well, you just have to do your job to the best of your ability, and I'm so sure that after years and years and years of study and work that that's what you do. So. Thank you for your service.
with the dispassionate scientist, you're saying that you don't really care what the next step is. Is that what you're putting in funding applications?
Well, the way we frame it is like if this works, it'd be a great treatment. If it doesn't work, then the people who are doing this in the community, they can stop, and then it's a win-win situation.
Right.
That either way we can improve health outcomes for people, and so. But identifying what we do in the funding application is like there's this big need, right? We have a lot of people suffering from depression. Like we need new treatments. The current treatments, like I wouldn't say they suck, but like
they're not working as well as we want them to.
When they're not as good as we want them, they have more side effects than we want. So we need more options. Okay, so you build that case that and then you build the logical case that this is potentially a good option. People are doing it in the community. They say it works. Well, why don't we test that? And then so that's how we build that rationale. So I always try to avoid that kind of advocacy type position. Yeah. But I guess the advocacy is for improving health outcomes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess there is we are all sentient beings and we have a viewpoint, and the viewpoint is of trying to improve health outcomes.
Future work. It's work that happens when it's in the future.
So from what I'm gathering, there's potential for LSD microdosing to treat depression. We don't know yet, which is why you're doing these studies. And then what would the future work be from there? Just move into stage 3 trials with a larger population?
Yeah. I guess, absolutely. I guess the little secret, maybe this will be the big reveal. How long does Liskin comes out?
We don't know.
A couple of weeks maybe.
Yeah.
But that's when it starts. Then we kind of just bleed them out week by week.
Okay, yeah. So one of the things we're really I guess what I'd say is one of the things we're really interested in is looking at different populations. So we're looking in depression, but often this happens with pharmacology. You call the treatment that the condition you're trying to fix the indication, right? So we're looking for other indications. So we're currently looking at the depression indication, but what other indications might this work for? And so we're now putting the funding applications together and planning around our next indication in terms of what other health disorders this could potentially treat. And so one of the big things that we're interested in is actually to do with the menstrual cycle.
Whoa, I've not heard about any of that research.
I need that research.
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be completely fascinating. As scientists, me and my collaborator, Dr. Rachel Sumner, who's a fantastic research fellow, she's really big into menstrual cycle research. And so we're really interested in the interaction between psychedelics and the menstrual cycle. And the biology is completely fascinating, right? Because you have this neural system in your brain and all these hormones floating around your body, and they interact with this neuroendocrine interface. It's pretty fascinating biology and potentially pretty interesting and horrifically understudied. Like just when you learn more and more about women's health conditions, you realize that as a society, we've really been fucking useless at like taking care of women's health. So it would be good to put more time and effort and energy into that.
That would be fascinating. So like it would be research on like how microdosing affects mood during a menstrual cycle.
Absolutely.
Oh my God. I have self-diagnosed PMDD because
that's what we're planning to look at.
Oh my God. Yes. I love this so much.
Out of the bag.
Because literally every month I'm like, I have a day where I feel completely psychotic. And I'm not saying this flippantly, but like if I ever have suicidal thoughts, it's always, and it's not necessarily like actionable, but it's like really intense mood dip for like 2 days.
Have you read Eilert Waldman's book? Eilert Waldman, an author in America, wrote a book called A Really Good Day, where she described her microdosing to self-treat her PMDD. Wow. And so that's kind of part of the basis of what we're working on. It's going to take, we've actually got ethics approval and regulatory approval, but we've got no money yet. So at the moment, my quest is to raise the millions of dollars I need to essentially investigate this as a treatment for PMDD.
Okay, well, you hear that, world? Give Suresh all the money, please.
Like we have everything we need. We have the drug. We have like the ethical approval to do it, the regulatory approval. We have the staff that know how to do it, and the know-how. All we need is the cash to get started.
Well, and you also have one very willing potential
It sounds like it. I mean, it's a terrible disorder. Complete, yeah. And it's a diversion from psychedelics, right? There's basically fuck all research on PMDD, right? Although it's this debilitating condition, we've talked to a number of women who have it. It's completely debilitating. No research gets done on this. It's just like this marginalized condition. Women don't get treated properly by the healthcare service. They get kind of thrown between psychiatry and gynecology and endocrinology. It's pretty awful, and the treatments that are existing for it are pretty bad. So there's a big health need there.
And it's awesome that you guys are researching, because I mean, even just with normal medications, I feel like, from what I understand from my half-remembered podcast listening of science podcasts, is that like even medications tested on, or I think it's medication, lots of things are just tested just on men as a standard thing. And the research is not really there for women, even though we're very different.
Yeah. And to be honest, we're guilty of that. Our microdosing, our first trial was only on men. But we knew that there was this potential for an interaction to happen. So we were kind of aware of that. So it wasn't like we knew that because I was working with Rachel and we'd already done 10 years of menstrual cycle research. We knew that when we come to study menstruating women, that it needed to be done properly and really taken into account. So we've designed it our own, we've designed 2 bespoke studies to look at this particularly and carefully. So as opposed to doing a shit job of it, we're going to do 2 studies that completely deconstruct and
Amazing.
get into it. Yeah.
It wasn't just because you're like, man, I'm a massive fan of tech bros and I only want to study tech
No,
bros.
absolutely not. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Suresh. I loved that interview. I've learned so much, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with all the trials.
Well, hope you're patient because it takes a long time to do this stuff.
I love a good at the end of 10 years surprise. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Suresh.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.